Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH for procedures of the sales comparison approach, partial interests, and real property rights. PG 15 life interests. Notes print. Leave a comment. Life interests. A life interest is defined as rights of use, occupancy, and control, limited to the lifetime of a designated party, sometimes referred to as the life tenant. A typical example would be where an elderly person transfers ownership of a property to another party, perhaps a relative, but retains the right to live in the property for the rest of their life. Upon their death, the property transfers to the person named when the life interest was created, called the remainder man. During the life of the holder of the life interest, the interest is called an estate in remainder. Life interests usually present a difficult appraisal problem. Normally, if you are purchasing property, you could move in and occupy it. Or you could at least rent it out to someone else if you didn't choose to occupy it. However, with a life interest, someone else will be occupying it for an indefinite period, and you will receive no income. Obviously, a property under such a restriction should be worth less than one with a fee simple title. If it is necessary to use a transaction involving a life interest as a comparable sale, some sort of adjustment would be necessary to equalize the sales price to that of a fee simple transaction. In most cases, the fact of a life interest would disqualify the sale as an atypical transaction that is hard to quantify. Any adjustment to the sales price of a life interest property would involve some sort of discounting of the value based upon mortality tables and the expected remaining life of the person holding the life interest. It is a complex undertaking. End of page. Chapter start. 20%. Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH for procedures of the sales comparison approach, partial interests, and real property rights. PG 16 leased fee and leasehold. Notes print. Leave a comment. Leased fee and leasehold. Leased fee interest is defined as the ownership interest held by the lessor, which includes the right to receive the contract rent specified in the lease plus the reversionary right when the lease expires. This is the property owner's interest, i.e., landlord's interest, in a property that is leased. Leasehold interest is defined as the right held by the lessee to use and occupy real estate for a stated term and under the conditions specified in the lease. If a house or land is leased at the time of sale, the value of the leasehold may be calculated separately from the leased fee ownership of the property itself. The appraiser would account for the terms and also factor in the length of time remaining on the lease. Even though the owner of a leasehold interest has no real fee interest, a leasehold interest may have value if the contract rent stipulated in a lease is less than the property's market rent. End of page. Chapter start. 20%. Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH for procedures of the sales comparison approach, partial interests, and real property rights. PG 17 partial interests Fannie Mae forms. Notes print. Leave a comment. Partial interests Fannie Mae forms. In the URAR appraisal form 1004, for many years there were only two choices that could be checked, fee simple or leasehold. In In the March 2005 version of the form, they added another choice, a box called Other, and a blank line for explanation. For residential properties, leasehold meant the improvements were located on leased land. This was usually not the case, except in certain parts of the country. But what if the rights appraised were something else, such as a life interest? In the previous forms, there was no place to explain another form of interest. Many appraisers just checked fee simple because it sure wasn't leasehold, and didn't bother explaining it in the addendum. Now there is a space, but if you check Other, you need to explain it fully and address its impact on value. Most likely you will have to continue in the addendum. End of page. Chapter start. 20%. Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH for procedures of the sales comparison approach, partial interests, and real property rights. PG 18 partial interests Fannie Mae forms. Notes print. Leave a comment. Partial interests Fannie Mae forms. There is a special situation in the small residential income property appraisal form, Fannie Mae Form 1025. The same three choices are offered for property rights appraised, fee simple, leasehold, and other. However, if you are appraising a 2, 3, or 4 unit property, and at least one unit is rented, you no longer have a fee simple estate. Fee simple implies that the owner retains the whole bundle of rights. One of the rights of ownership is the right to lease the property. But once you lease the property, then you have given up the right of exclusive possession, and no longer retain the full bundle of rights. Therefore, if you are appraising a multi-unit property, where at least one unit is rented, the property rights appraised consist of a leased fee interest. You need to check the box labeled Other and explain the situation. End of page. Chapter start. 20%. Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH for procedures of the sales comparison approach, partial interests, and real property rights. PG 19 partial interests. Notes print. Leave a comment. Partial interests. Other times, partial interests are created when some part of the fee simple estate is taken away by easements or encroachments. An easement is defined as the right to use another's land for a stated purpose. Under the rights of an easement, someone else is allowed to enter a property, and therefore the owner has relinquished the exclusive right to occupy and use the property. This creates a partial interest or diminished estate. The effect of an easement can vary from negligible to substantial. A simple right-of-way across the edge of a property may have little or no impact. But a right-of-way or power line easement through the center of a property may have substantial impact on usability and value. End of page. Chapter start. 20%. Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH for procedures of the sales comparison approach, partial interests, and real property rights. PG 20 partial interests easements. Notes print. Leave a comment. Partial interest easements. An easement in gross is defined as an easement that benefits a legal person or entity, individual, corporation, partnership, LLC, government entity, etc., and not a particular tract of land, an easement having a servient estate, but no dominant estate. Examples of easements in gross would be easements for railroads, pipelines, and utility companies. An easement in gross burdens one's property, but does not benefit another parcel of land. Usually easements in gross are common in an area and affect properties equally. Everyone in a neighborhood may have a utility easement along the front of their property for the water and sewer lines. Therefore, there is no difference for which to adjust among the properties, because the properties are all equal in this regard. It becomes a wash. End of page. Chapter start. 21%. Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH for procedures of the sales comparison approach, partial interests, and real property rights. PG 21 partial interests, easements. Notes print. Leave a comment. Partial interests, easements. Sometimes, easements work for the benefit or detriment of one party over another. If I own a property in the rear of yours and access it through a right-of-way over your property, I gain a benefit, and your property is encumbered. In this example, I would have the dominant tenement, and you would have the servient tenement. This type of situation is called an easement appurtenant. That is defined as an easement that is attached to, benefits, and passes with the transfer of the dominant estate, runs with the land for the benefit of the dominant estate, and continues to burden the servient estate, although such an estate may be transferred to new owners. My property in the rear is worth more because of the right-of-way access than if it had no access at all. A positive adjustment would have to be made when comparing my property to one with no recorded access. On the other hand, the property in the front, over which my right-of-way passes, may be worth less than another property that is not encumbered by a right-of-way. In that case, an adjustment would have to be made when comparing that property to one that does not have a right-of-way over it. The most common way to ascertain an adjustment amount would be through a paired data analysis. End of page. Chapter start. 21%. Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH for procedures of the sales comparison approach, partial interests, and real property rights. PG 22 partial interests, easements. Notes print. Leave a comment. Partial interests, easements. An affirmative easement is defined as the right to perform a specific act on a property owned by another. This is the good kind of easement. It works in your favor. A negative easement is defined as an easement preventing a property owner from certain, otherwise permitted, uses of his or her land. Example, agreeing not to do something such as building a wall or fence blocking an adjoining property's view. Negative easements can be punitive in nature and create losses in value. Examples of negative easements would include conservation easements, drainage easements, historic preservation easement, subsurface rights, air rights. All of these easements take away some of the basic rights inherent in the fee simple ownership. You would no longer have full control of all aspects of the property. You would not have an unlimited right to develop the property in any manner you wished. End of page. Chapter start. 21%.